Welcome back to Outsiders. As always, I'm James Morrow, and I'm back here again with the irreproachable Rita Panahi and the unimpeachable Rowan Dean. And unimpeachable may just be more than we can say for Donald Trump if the Democrats and large sections of the American press and bureaucracy have their way. Having always considered Trump an illegitimate president, guilty from day one of stealing Hillary Clinton's birthright, they have sought to remove him from the Oval Office. And now they think they have their chance with a whistleblower who filed recently a second-hand complaint about Trump's handling of a phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Never mind that contrary to the initial claims of House Intelligence Committee Chair and one of Capitol Hill's most fervent anti-Trumpers, Adam Schiff, the whistleblower had, in fact, been in touch with Schiff's office before he filed the complaint, making the whole thing seem just a little bit like a political setup. Or there's also the fact that the investigation into the supposed political dirt was actually about Joe Biden and his son Hunter, whose previous career highlight had been being kicked out of the U.S. Navy for cocaine use. And the question was just what was he doing being paid $600,000 a year by an oil and gas company with extensive business in the notoriously corrupt country of Ukraine. And then, of course, there's that transcript of the call in question that was released by the White House with the Ukrainian president, which actually shows none of the alleged quid pro quo Democrats have been hyperventilating about. With the whistleblower's complaint petering out, the Democrats are now said to be considered talking to a second source and promoting his claims, which suggests that the Democrats are already looking for a do-over on this one. Which is why the best way to think of what's happening right now is to imagine it as actually a replay of those vicious and nasty hearings over appointing Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Then, as now, the Democrats have attempted to get all their ducks in the row with one or more victims, or in this case, whistleblowers, and then use selective leaks to friendly media to try and advance the story, whether or not there's any truth to it. And then, as now, it is more than likely to fail and leave the Democrats in an even tougher position, yoked to a divisive campaign to unseat a president with what will be less than a year to an election where they have yet to field a viable candidate. Even the process is bogus, because despite everyone talking about the I word, right now what we're doing is just karaoke impeachment hearings. They aren't even holding a real vote on it. The Democrats are just using their committee powers to go on fishing expeditions. Of course, they won't have any trouble finding more people to file complaints, no matter the worthiness. As was reported not long after Trump's inauguration in 2017, bureaucrats were already rubbing their hands together with schemes to take down Trump. As Vanity Fair reported one of them saying, "You're going to see the bureaucrats using time to their advantage," adding that people here will resist and push back against orders they find unconscionable by whistleblowing, leaking to the press, and lodging internal complaints. And in a slightly more sinister fashion, recall that in 2017, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer warned, "Let me tell you, you take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday getting back at you." Did I mention, by the way, that the first whistleblower is also thought to be a CIA officer? Anyway, what it comes down to is this. The bizarre inside the Beltway idea that investigating connected Democrats like Hunter Biden for trading on their family names and access is somehow a crime is exactly the sort of nepotistic, cronyistic, swamp creature sort of behavior the American people voted to end in 2016.
And from one bizarre story to another, joining us now is a great friend of Outsiders, the enigmatic, charismatic, and hugely talented Mark Steyn, one of the world's leading free speech activists and a regular commentator on the Tucker Carlson show. And of course, you won't ever want to miss his brilliant Mark Steyn show on steinonline.com. As Outsiders fans know, Mark is also a world-leading expert on that notorious cloak and dagger tale of boozy late-night intrigue, worthy of a John le Carré novel, known simply as the Alexander Downer, George Papadopolous, Kensington wine bar, Russian collusion scandal affair. Yes, the fabulous fable that Donald Trump has asked Scott Morrison to help him investigate because Trump suspects Downer may have been responsible, inadvertently or otherwise, for launching the entire Russian collusion hoax that drove the left insane for 2 years. The same story, by the way, that this show labelled a complete hoax from day one. Outsiders, of course, have been aware of this bizarre story for over 18 months now, in no small part thanks to Mark Steyn. Mark, welcome back to Outsiders.
Hey, great to be back with you, Rowan.
Well, Mark, it's all back in the news again, Alexander Downer, so we want to get onto that in a second, but just quickly give us your thoughts on what James was talking about with the so-called impeachment of Donald Trump. Is this more nonsense, or is there something serious in this?
Well, the guys who are driving it do have a serious thing that they wish to accomplish. They're launching, if you can follow this CIA whistleblower and the Democrats are launching this investigation to stop Trump's investigation into the phony Russia investigation. So it takes a new investigation to stop the current investigation into the old investigation. That's the way things work. That's the way things work in Washington. So in actual fact, even the impeachment is centrally located in Alexander Downer's cocktail olive in the Kensington wine rooms.
Fantastic. Now, Mark, let's go back. You've talked about this story before brilliantly. It's back in the news again in Australia. We've had comments very brief comments from Alexander Downer himself. People are talking about it again. Take us through it step by step. You've been with this story all along. It's as funny as it is serious, but take us through it, Mark Steyn.
Well, a guy called George Papadopolous, who was a very minor person distantly connected to the Trump campaign, not someone who's ever had any contact with Donald Trump himself, finds himself in London, and he's suddenly being invited out to have drinks with influential and important figures. I spent a couple of hours with Papadopolous a few months ago, and he walked me through the Alexander Downer encounter because he said it was like all the others, in which an older, powerful man invites young George to come and have a drink, which is in itself flattering. When George gets there, he finds there's a comely young lady who is positioned next to him on the banquette that he wasn't expecting to see. In this case, it was Erica Thompson, who I believe is now working for the ABC down in Australia. And they have, contrary to popular rumour, Alexander Downer didn't get, and I've drunk with Alexander Downer, and keeping up with him can be quite a challenge. But in this case, according to Papadopolous only had one gin and tonic. He finds certain things about the encounter very odd, in that Alexander Downer doesn't say anything about Australia. He isn't interested in talking about Australia, about Australian politics. He's the Australian High Commissioner, and George, as an American, has taken the trouble to find out what a High Commissioner is, because they don't have them in America. And he understands that this guy is supposed to be representing Australian interests in Her Majesty's imperial capital, and yet he doesn't have a single thing to say about Australia. And furthermore, he keeps fumbling with his telephone and pointing it towards George in a way that would, like you're trying to get the magic spy camera to work in an episode of Get Smart. And while I think there are limits to Alexander Downer's espionage genius, I'm not saying every other night he's rappelling into presidential palaces and toppling the Banana Republic's president for life of that week. I'm not saying he does that at all. But I am saying that this seems fairly obviously not the kind of meeting that a normal, proper Australian High Commissioner in London going about his business would be engaged in. And frankly, Papadopoulos' account of it is rather more persuasive than Alexander's.
So, Mark, Donald Trump asked Scott Morrison to investigate or to look into this. So how much do the Trump camp feel that this is pretty pivotal, this meeting, in launching the entire Russian collusion story that went on and on. You can't add up the media hours, the money that must have been spent on this thing. How pivotal was that Downer meeting, do you think Trump believes?
Oh, it is absolutely critical, and that's why Trump is anxious to find out the involvement of foreign intelligence agencies, whether it's MI6 or ASIO, in what was going on. What's interesting about the Downer meeting, to take it seriously for a moment, is that Downer reported on the meeting directly to the Americans. And the quote-unquote Australian government in Canberra didn't hear about it until they got a request from Washington for more information about the meeting. And at that point, the guys in Canberra...
Is this normal for a high commissioner or ambassador to go to a foreign country and talk directly to them?
No, states have privileged state-to-state relations. I don't know why individuals who purportedly represent a particular state are providing high-value information to foreign intelligence agencies without running it through their own government first. So I certainly think Alexander Downer, it's interesting to me that he reported on the Papadopolous meeting to Washington, and Canberra didn't hear about it until some time afterwards.
James?
So here there's a current controversy then about whether or not we should be handing over in Australia diplomatic cables to the United States that might have had something to do with it. What you're saying, though, is that there may very well not be any sort of communication between Downer and Canberra, but that he may have had some other sort of back channel link to the U.S. directly. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he took this information, I believe, to the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires in London, which again is unusual, because if it is in the nature of intelligence, he thought it was so important. I saw Alexander Downer on Australian TV, or in the Australian, I think it was, saying that he was had always been a big supporter of the Five Eyes, the intelligence sharing information arrangement between America, Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. That's a government-to-government intelligence sharing administration. It's not Alexander Downer going full John le Carré and meeting Americans in Hyde Park or Kensington Gardens and leaving it under a dead drop under a rock. It's supposed to be government-to-government intelligence sharing, and this seems to have bypassed official channels in that respect.
Now, Mark, you did an excellent interview recently, two-part interview with George Papadopolous on your YouTube Mark Steyn show, in which you actually went into the nitty-gritty of what that information was, and the word emails was never mentioned. Now, apparently the whole Russian collusion hoax was to do with Hillary Clinton's emails being in the hands of the Russians, but in your conversation with George Papadopolous, the word emails was never even mentioned. Talk us through that.
Yes, which is interesting and goes back to what George Papadopolous was saying about Alexander Downer's attempts to record the conversation as he saw it. And he thinks the fact that the word emails was never mentioned actually came back to bite the FBI in the butt, because they then had to try and entrap him on various other things. The fact is, by that point, not just the Russians, but all kinds of governments around the world, friendly and unfriendly, were sitting on Hillary's emails. The point is, they needed a pretext. Hillary was being invested as a criminal investigation by the FBI. The Trump investigation was supposedly a counterintelligence operation. You can't launch a counterintelligence operation against the opposing political party, so they nominally launched one to investigate the Russian emails as a backdoor into the Trump campaign. And then dear old Papadopoulos, having only had one gin and tonic and not being quite as liquored up as Mr. Downer would have liked, doesn't actually say the magic word emails. I mean, what we have here is like Incredibly incompetent entrapment. In the end, Papadopoulos influential, powerful men keep inviting him, a nobody, to drink. I mean, for example, I would like Mr. Downer to explain, he's a sociable and convivial fellow, but he regards his time as valuable. And there's nothing about George Papadopolous, who he was, what he did, that would merit a one-on-one gin and tonic in the Kensington wine rooms. You might say, well, I've got 15 minutes at Australia House. Come and see me at 10:30 in the morning. But the idea of taking him to the Kensington wine rooms, a nobody, in effect, being wined and dined by the High Commissioner is actually unusual on its face.
Absolutely. Now, tell us about why the Democrats are so terrified of the Attorney General's investigation of the investigation. Why are they so desperate for that not to be implemented? And talk to us also about the media's role in this new push for impeachment with suggestions that Trump was putting undue pressure on the Ukrainians.
Well, I think it all goes back to Wednesday morning in November 2016. They've never accepted the legitimacy of Trump's election. And they're desperate to actually find some pretext to explain, A, why, from the media's point of view, why they got it all wrong. Because until Trump won Florida at whatever it was, 10:47 on Tuesday night, the New York Times' predictions for a Hillary victory had a 97% chance of certainty. Then she won Florida and all went south, and they woke up a blotto in the beer nuts on Wednesday morning, and instead of actually saying, where did we go wrong, they said, oh, the Russians must have done this. When the Russian investigation belly flopped, they've now decided that Trump is colluding with the president of Ukraine. You mentioned that Hunter Biden, again, a nobody, was getting 600 grand from a Ukrainian oligarch for no reason whatsoever. This is in a country where the average person at that time made $200 a month. So why is Hunter Biden being paid $50,000 a month? That's something, according to Joe Biden is on film boasting that he had Ukraine's prosecutor general fired. So it's not as if there's anything mysterious about this. We've got prima facie evidence of corruption. And the Democrats are saying, oh, well, why did Trump mention this to the Ukrainian president? It's the equivalent of a guy being caught on video saying, oh, yeah, I dumped the body, I put him in a cement overcoat and dumped the body in the lake, and then protesting after the video's gone out that somebody mentioned it to the local police chief. Joe Biden basically confessed to the crime.
You say, you're absolutely, everything you say is 100% accurate, and yet if you listen to the media narrative, even here in Australia, it's presented that the Trump administration and Trump himself has done something terribly wrong to warrant being impeached. Tell us about the media's role in this, because they seem to be very much complicit in pushing this fantasy.
Oh, yeah, I think they've abandoned any pretense at normal coverage of politics. And I think it does go back to the way they got it so spectacularly wrong in November 2016. The thing about it is that, well, you know, I remember earlier that year, I think it was in February, I was in Australia, and I spoke to many senior figures, former cabinet ministers. I won't hint at their names because you'll be able to work it out. And when I said Trump was going to win the nomination and win the election, they all laughed at me and used unpleasant words beginning with F. They thought he was a joke. And the fact is, they had paid too much attention to the New York Times and CNN. And once the media woke up on Wednesday morning, instead of saying, you know, we need to just go quiet for a couple of weeks, and this is a period for self-examination. How did we get it so wrong? Why do we report on normal American communities as if we're on an anthropological expedition to the most remote jungles in New Guinea? Maybe we don't understand America at all. That's what they should have done. Instead, they said, this can't have happened.
Fantastic.
So it must be Putin.
Fantastic. Mark Steyn.
Must be Putin.
Mark Steyn, thank you so much. Brilliant to have you on Outsiders. Thanks so much. People can catch you on steinonline.com, and can't wait to see you next in Australia. We might have a gin and tonic. See you, mate.
Yeah, yeah. The cocktail olives are on Alexander. See you guys.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's, of course, Mark Steyn. We'll be back with Lefty Lunacy and lots more back in a tick.
$120 for